I found out my fiancé was cheating on me while approving his promotion paperwork. The woman he was sleeping with. She worked in my department. Neither of them knew I was the person signing their contracts. And for 3 full days, I said nothing. Before we start, if you love emotional stories about betrayal, revenge, and powerful personal comebacks, subscribe to Marrianne Tales and join me for daily real-life storytelling. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Because this story didn't begin with revenge. It began with trust. My name is Alina. I'm 32 years old. At the time this happened, I thought my life was finally stable. I had spent my 20s grinding, long hours, uncomfortable leadership roles, and constantly proving I deserved to sit at executive tables dominated by older men who called me young lady, even after I became director of operations. Success didn't happen overnight. It happened through exhaustion, through skipped weekends, through learning how to stay calm while people underestimated me. By 32, I supervised 3 departments at a fast-growing consulting firm in Chicago. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. But decisions passed through me before they reached the CEO. Most employees barely understood my position. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Because control is quieter than authority. Outside work, my life revolved around Daniel. We had been together 4 years. We met before my promotion, back when I was still climbing. Daniel was warm, funny, emotionally attentive. He remembered small details about me. Left notes in my purse. Cooked dinner when I worked late. The kind of man people described as safe. When he proposed, I cried so hard I couldn't answer immediately. I thought I had finally built both parts of life people chase. Career stability. Emotional security. I had no idea one of them was already collapsing. The engagement phase. Wedding planning filled our evenings. Guest lists. Venue visits. Arguments about flowers that somehow felt important at the time. Daniel worked in marketing, different company, different industry. At least, that's what I believed. One night during dinner, he casually mentioned applying for a position at a consulting firm expanding downtown. I smiled. That's great, which company? He named mine. I laughed. What a coincidence. He laughed too. Neither of us realized how ironic that moment would become. Because while Daniel submitted applications through public hiring channels, his resume eventually landed on my desk. And I didn't recognize it at first. The resume. Executives don't personally interview every candidate. But senior hires required my approval. A stack of files waited for me late one Friday evening. I skimmed through qualifications, references, performance summaries. Then I saw a familiar last name. Daniel Harper. My brain stalled. I opened the file fully. Same university. Same career history. Same phone number saved in my contacts. My fiancé had applied to work at my company. Without telling me. I leaned back in my chair, confused more than concerned. Maybe he wanted to surprise me. Maybe he didn't want favoritism accusations. I convinced myself it was harmless. Professional boundaries mattered. So I did exactly what leadership required. I evaluated him objectively. And objectively, he was qualified. I approved his advancement to final interviews. Still smiling at the strange coincidence. Still completely unaware of what was coming. 3 weeks later, Daniel got the job. He celebrated like it was destiny. We'll finally understand each other's work lives, he said, pulling me into a hug. I agreed. What I didn't tell him was that technically, I was now several levels above him in the company hierarchy. Our departments didn't overlap directly. He would never report to me. Corporate structure, protected anonymity at executive levels. To him, I was simply working in operations. He never asked for specifics, and I never corrected him. At the time, it felt irrelevant. Soon, it would become everything. Melissa joined the company the same month. Bright, charming, social. The type of employee everyone noticed immediately. She transferred into Daniel's division. I met her briefly during onboarding presentations. Confident handshake, easy smile, ambitious energy. Nothing about that meeting felt significant, just another employee among hundreds. If someone had told me then she would change my life within weeks, I would have laughed. The shift started subtly. Daniel began staying late at work more often. New projects, networking events, team dinners. All perfectly normal explanations, except something small changed in his behavior. He stopped sharing details. When I asked about coworkers, answers became vague. When I mentioned company updates, he listened carefully, almost too carefully, like he was filtering information. One evening, while sitting beside him on the couch, his phone lit up. A message preview appeared briefly. Melissa. Today was fun, smiling face with smiling eyes. My stomach tightened. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Work friendships exist. Smiley faces exist. Trust matters. So I ignored the feeling. At least I tried to. 2 weeks later, HR forwarded me an internal concern report. Anonymous submission. Possible workplace relationship affecting team dynamics. Normally, these were routine, but attached screenshots made my hands go cold. Late-night messages, private lunches, inside jokes. Photos taken inside the office elevator. Daniel and Melissa laughing together, standing closer than colleagues should. The timestamp on one photo matched a night Daniel told me he was working overtime. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart beating slowly, strangely calm, because shock doesn't always arrive as panic. Sometimes it arrives as silence. And then I noticed the final detail. The complaint had been escalated to me, because technically, I was the executive responsible for both of their departments. Neither of them knew. But their relationship, their secrecy, their betrayal had just landed directly under my authority. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just the betrayed fiancé. I was their boss. I didn't cry. That's always the part people expect: tears, anger, immediate confrontation. But when betrayal arrives quietly, your brain switches into observation mode instead of emotion. I closed the HR file, sat perfectly still in my office. Outside my glass wall, employees moved normally. Phones rang. People laughed near the coffee station. The world hadn't changed. Only my understanding of it had. Daniel was cheating on me, with someone who worked under my executive oversight, and neither of them had any idea. I remember staring at my reflection in the dark computer screen and thinking one very clear sentence. You cannot react emotionally yet, because I wasn't only a fiancé. I was leadership. Every move I made carried consequences beyond my personal life. If I exploded, I would lose authority. If I ignored it, I would lose myself. So I chose something harder. I waited. For 3 days, I observed. Not obsessively. Professionally. Executive access gave me visibility ordinary employees didn't realize existed. Meeting attendance logs, project collaboration schedules, building access timestamps. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive. Just operational oversight. And patterns began forming quickly. Daniel and Melissa arrived at work within minutes of each other. They scheduled overlapping lunch breaks. Late meeting room bookings appeared twice a week, always under project review excuses. One evening, security logs showed both badge swipes exiting the building nearly 2 hours after everyone else. My chest tightened reading that line, because that was the same night Daniel had kissed my forehead and said, "Long day tomorrow, I should get some rest." I didn't feel rage. I felt detachment, like I was analyzing strangers. The hardest part wasn't work. It was going home. Daniel still greeted me with warmth, still cooked dinner, still asked about wedding plans, still said I love you with complete ease. That's what betrayal really looks like. Normalcy wearing a mask. One night he handed me wine and smiled. "You seem stressed lately," he said. The irony almost made me laugh. "I'm fine," I replied, and for the first time since we met, I studied him instead of trusting him. How easily he lied. How comfortably he moved between two realities. I began noticing details I'd ignored before. He guarded his phone more carefully, showered immediately after coming home, smiled at messages he didn't explain. The signs had probably existed for weeks. I just hadn't been looking for them. At work, Melissa's behavior shifted too. She became unusually confident during meetings, spoke over colleagues, displayed subtle familiarity with internal updates she shouldn't yet know. Information Daniel likely shared privately. That realization hurt more than the affair itself. My professional world, the space I built through years of effort, had become part of their intimacy. They weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were crossing ethical lines inside my company, and that changed everything. Because now this wasn't only personal, it was professional misconduct. Every instinct told me to confront Daniel immediately, throw the screenshots onto the table, demand honesty, end the engagement. But another voice, calmer, sharper, stopped me. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. Or worse, he would confess without consequences. Walk away clean. Keep his job. Continue his life uninterrupted. And something deep inside me resisted that outcome. Not revenge. Accountability. I needed truth revealed properly. Not emotionally. Factually. And for the first time, I realized I held the power to ensure that happened. Our firm had strict workplace relationship policies. Relationships weren't forbidden, but undisclosed ones, especially affecting team performance, violated ethics standards. The anonymous complaint already existed, which meant HR was required to investigate. Normally, I would delegate the process, but this case fell directly under my department. Recusing myself immediately would raise questions. Continuing involvement required neutrality. I spent an entire evening reviewing policy manuals like they were legal documents. Because I needed certainty. If handled correctly, truth would reveal itself without me saying a single personal word. 3 days after discovering everything, I attended a department strategy meeting. Daniel and Melissa were both present. Neither knew I had final authority over the division. From their perspective, I was simply another executive observing performance metrics. Daniel smiled politely when he saw me. Professional, respectful, completely unaware. Melissa greeted me confidently. "I really admire how operations runs here," she said warmly. I nodded. "Thank you." Then I watched them throughout the meeting. Tiny glances, shared smiles, unspoken communication. People think no one notices. But leadership trains you to read rooms. And suddenly, every interaction confirmed what I already knew. They believed their secret was safe. That illusion gave me unexpected calm. That evening, Daniel suggested we finalize wedding invitations. We sat at the kitchen table, reviewing guest lists. My engagement ring caught the light as I moved my hand. He reached across the table, squeezing my fingers gently. "I'm really happy, he said. The words landed heavily. I studied his face carefully. Not searching for guilt. Searching for understanding. How could someone divide themselves so completely? I realized something painful then. The version of Daniel I loved might never have truly existed. He wasn't conflicted. He was comfortable living two truths simultaneously. And that realization changed my goal. I didn't want emotional closure anymore. I wanted clarity. For myself. For my future. For my dignity. The next morning, I scheduled an official ethics review. Standard procedure. Routine language. No accusations. Just process. HR began compiling interviews and documentation. Neither Daniel nor Melissa suspected anything unusual. To them, life continued normally. To me, each passing day felt like standing at the edge of a reveal only I could see coming. I didn't rush it. I didn't interfere. I simply allowed systems, the same systems I helped build, to work. And for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt control return. Not because I planned revenge, but because I refused to let betrayal define the ending of my story. Monday morning arrived with unsettling normalcy. Coffee machines hummed. Emails stacked endlessly. People discussed deadlines like nothing in the world had shifted. But behind corporate routine, an ethics review had quietly started moving. HR sent neutral calendar invitations. Operational review meeting. No accusations. No explanations. Just procedure. I approved every step with professional detachment. Daniel forwarded me a message during lunch. Crazy week starting. Lots of internal meetings. I stared at the text longer than necessary. He had no idea he was describing his own unraveling. At work, I became even calmer. It wasn't easy, not at all. Every nerve in my body was hurt with betrayal. Yet I stayed measured. Precise. Leadership has a strange side effect. The more emotional pressure you feel internally, the more composed you appear externally. Colleagues complimented my focus. Big projects going on, one manager asked. I smiled politely. You could say that. Meanwhile, HR gathered timelines, interviewed team members, reviewed collaboration logs. Evenings grew heavier. Daniel talked more than usual, over-explaining work updates, volunteering information I never asked for. Guilt often disguises itself as transparency. One night while cooking dinner, he said casually, "My team's under pressure lately. Office drama, you know." I watched him carefully. What kind of drama? He shrugged. Probably nothing serious. That was the moment I understood something deeply unsettling. He wasn't preparing to confess. He was preparing excuses. And I realized I no longer needed emotional confirmation. His choices had already answered every question. Friday morning, HR delivered preliminary findings. I opened the file alone in my office. Documented evidence. Repeated undisclosed meetings. Witness observations. Policy violations regarding workplace transparency. Nothing sensational. Just undeniable consistency. At the bottom of the report, recommendation, formal review hearing. Meaning both employees would be required to attend a compliance meeting with senior leadership. With me. I closed the file slowly. The moment had arrived. That evening at home felt surreal. Daniel ordered takeout. We watched television. He laughed at something on screen while my mind replayed tomorrow's schedule. I studied him quietly. This man had planned a wedding with me while building another relationship inside my professional world. Yet he sat beside me comfortably. Unaware. I felt sadness more than anger. Not because I still trusted him, but because I realized I was already emotionally leaving. Before confrontation. Before explanation. Before closure. Sometimes the heart exits long before the conversation happens. The next morning, the conference room was prepared early. Neutral lighting. Glass walls. Water placed neatly at each seat. HR representatives reviewed final notes. Everything followed corporate protocol. No drama. No personal emotion allowed. At 10 a.m. sharp, Melissa entered first. She smiled politely until she saw who was seated at the head of the table. Me. Confusion crossed her face. She hesitated. "I didn't realize you'd be here." I nodded calmly. "I oversee this division." The realization landed slowly. Her posture stiffened, eyes widened, understanding beginning to form. Then Daniel walked in. He stopped immediately when he saw me. For a brief second, relief appeared on his face, like seeing someone familiar. Then he noticed HR. The formal setup, the seriousness of the room. And finally, my expression. Professional. Composed. Distant. He looked from me to Melissa. Back to me again. Confusion turned into dawning awareness. "Elena," he said carefully. I folded my hands on the table. "This is a formal ethics review," I explained evenly. Neither of them spoke. Because in that moment, they understood. I wasn't there as a partner. I wasn't there as someone hurt. I was the executive responsible for evaluating their conduct. And the power dynamic they never imagined suddenly became undeniable. Silence filled the room. HR began outlining policy guidelines. Neutral language. Objective tone. But the emotional tension was overwhelming. Daniel stared at me like he was trying to rewrite reality. Melissa avoided eye contact completely. I watched them both the same way I would observe any employees under review. Because professionalism became my armor. Questions were asked. Timelines confirmed. Opportunities given for disclosure. Melissa spoke first, voice trembling slightly. "Yes, we've been seeing each other." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The confession landed without drama. Just truth. HR documented everything carefully. Then came the final question. Were both parties aware of existing personal relationships that could create conflicts of interest? Daniel looked at me. His voice dropped. "Yes." The word echoed louder than shouting ever could. No denial. No justification. Just acknowledgement. And strangely, that was the moment I felt completely calm. Because I no longer needed answers. Only closure. As the meeting ended, HR explained next steps, administrative review, potential disciplinary outcomes. Routine corporate language. But beneath it lived personal. The door clicked shut, leaving only the two of us standing on opposite sides of a table that suddenly felt symbolic, professional distance, replacing personal intimacy. He ran a hand through his hair. "Elena, I didn't know you were." "My boss," I finished calmly. He nodded slowly. Shock still sat on his face. Not guilt. Shock. And that realization settled something inside me. He wasn't shaken because he hurt me. He was shaken because the power dynamic had changed. I remained standing. Professional posture. Controlled breathing. "Let's separate things clearly," I said. "Right now, this discussion is personal, not corporate." He exhaled heavily, relief flickering across his expression. "I was going to tell you," he said quickly. The sentence came too fast. Too rehearsed. I tilted my head slightly. "When?" He hesitated. And silence answered for him. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he continued. "It just developed." I listened quietly. No interruptions. No raised voice. Because something surprising had happened inside me during the investigation. The heartbreak had already processed itself. What remained was clarity. "You didn't accidentally build a relationship," I said softly. "You made repeated choices." He swallowed. "I never meant to hurt you." That sentence used to mean something to me. Now it sounded incomplete. Intent doesn't erase action. I nodded once. "I believe you didn't want consequences," I replied, "but you accepted them anyway." His shoulders dropped slightly. He understood then. This wasn't a conversation he could emotionally steer. I sat down finally, exhaustion settling into my bones. "Do you know what part surprised me?" I asked. He shook his head. It wasn't the cheating. His eyes widened slightly. It was realizing you were comfortable living two lives while planning a future with me. My voice stayed calm but honest. You came home every night knowing the truth and still talked about our wedding. That was the moment guilt finally appeared. Real guilt. He sat across from me slowly. I didn't know how to stop it, he admitted quietly. And oddly enough, that was the most truthful thing he said all day. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger. The movement felt strangely peaceful. I placed it gently on the table between us. I'm not angry anymore, I said. His voice cracked. Please don't do this. But I already had. Not in that moment. Weeks earlier, when I first chose dignity over confrontation. I can't marry someone I have to investigate to understand, I said gently. Tears filled his eyes. I love you. I believed he meant it. People can love someone and still betray them. Both things can exist at once. But love without integrity isn't safety. And I finally understood that. Later that afternoon, HR finalized disciplinary outcomes. Melissa received a formal warning and departmental transfer. Her performance history allowed remediation. Daniel's case was different. He had knowingly withheld a personal conflict involving a senior executive, me. Violation of disclosure policy. Loss of managerial track eligibility. Probationary review period. No dramatic firing. Just professional consequences aligned with policy. Fair. Objective. Appropriate. I signed the documentation with steady hands. Not as revenge. As responsibility. And that distinction mattered deeply to me. A week later, Melissa requested to speak privately. She entered my office cautiously. I didn't know, she said immediately, about you too. I believe you, I replied. Her eyes filled with embarrassment. I feel horrible. I studied her for a moment. She wasn't my enemy. She was someone who walked into a situation already compromised. We both deserved honesty, I said calmly. She nodded, visibly relieved that I wasn't hostile. And surprisingly, I felt no resentment toward her. Because betrayal belongs to the person who made promises, not the person unaware of them. Daniel moved out quietly 2 weeks later. No dramatic fights. No screaming matches. Just boxes carried downstairs and a relationship ending with uncomfortable maturity. Nearly 6 months later, I saw Daniel again at a company event. He looked different. Quieter. More cautious. He approached respectfully. I'm glad you're doing well, he said. I am, I replied honestly. No tension remained. Only distance. And closure. As he walked away, I realized something unexpected. I felt gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the lesson hidden inside it. I used to believe power meant winning. Being right. Proving someone wrong. But real power is something quieter. It's the ability to walk away without losing yourself. He cheated. Yes. But the real turning point wasn't discovering the affair. It was realizing I didn't need revenge to feel whole again. They never knew I was their boss. Until the moment accountability arrived. And by then, I wasn't seeking punishment. I was choosing peace. Thanks for watching my story. If you liked it, comment down below. Consider subscribing for more tales.